Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. I hope you all guys are doing well. So, again, first of all, I'd like to apologize because there is some technical issues that make us cannot meet online in Microsoft Teams. So yesterday I got notification from Bu Afina that this morning you guys are having kind of IELTS preparation test. So yeah, I think it's better for you to focus on that class because I believe that this material could be delivered through this online video, and I believe that it doesn't reduce its effectiveness for you to understand this topic. Okay, so in this meeting, we are moving forward to the next main function of human resource management, which is training. To be more specific, I will also discuss about orientation. So basically, it is about the orientation and training. If you remember this figure, which illustrate the main functions of human resource management. So yesterday we have finished the discussion about the selection process. So basically in this meeting we move on to this function of human resource management. So after you got the employee that you want to hire through the recruitment and selection process, the next stage you need to do is to give them kind of orientation and training to make sure that they understand the mission of your organization, the culture, or even some basic information about your company, like the routines, the work hours, something like that, which usually is covered through the orientation program. Other than that, you need to make sure that those new employees you hire have sufficient capabilities, have sufficient knowledge, skills, ability, and characteristics needed to perform particular jobs. That's what we are going to discuss today. So there are two learning objectives in this meeting. The first one, I expect that by completing this course, by completing this meeting, you guys can explain what is orientation and training. And the second one is that I hope that you guys can explain and discuss the stages in the training process. So let's start with discussing what is employee orientation. So basically, employee orientations is a procedure for providing new employees with basic information about the firm. Um, the orientation process could take only several hours or even several days, depending on the complexity of your um, companies. And there are several information that you need to share with your new employees during the orientation process. It might start by introducing those new employees with their co-workers or their colleagues, and then you might also try to get them familiar with the workplace. For example, you can show them um, the table, or in our school, for example, the professors work in so-called a cubicle. You might notice that the professors in our school work in kind of box with around perhaps 4 meters square, which inside that box all professors have at least one table, and then one office chair, and then one chair for the guests, for the students. And then typically there is also a cabinet inside that cubicle or box, something like that. So you might, if you are a new professor in our school, you might be introduced um, to your so-called cubicle. And the objective of that introduction is to reduce so-called quote unquote first day jitters. It is a term to show that, to illustrate that typically um, when you first time coming to your new job or your new office, there will be you will have kind of mixed feeling. Um, you might experience kind of excitement in one side, but on the other side, you might also feel kind of anxiety, right? So that's a kind of so-called first day jitters. So the orientation process basically um, is conducted to reduce that kind of anxiety. So by um, getting to know your new coworkers, your new colleagues, by understanding your workplace, by knowing where is your table, and then what is the Wi-Fi password, and then where is the pantry, where is the toilet, it can reduce your kind of anxiety. Another basic information that might be provided during this orientation process is by introducing, organization policies, the do's and don'ts in the organization, and then the safety measures and regulations. For example, in case there is an earthquake, what should you do? In case there is a fire, what you need to do, and so on and so forth. And yeah, it might also include it kind of a facilities tour. I already mentioned about it. During the orientation process, you might want to show where is the parking area for the employee and where is the parking area for the bus, for example. It will be very embarrassing for the new employee um, when you come to your new office and you incidentally park your car in your boss parking space, right? So you need to understand where you need to put your vehicle and so on and so forth, and then yeah, something like that. So the orientation process might also involve, more advanced activities such as introducing organization mission, for example, what the organization wants to achieve in the next 5 or 10 or even next 20 years, something like that. And then the structure of the organization, who are the um, board directors, and then who is the CEO, and so on and so forth. So when you when you incidentally meet the CEO in in the street, for example, you will recognize your CEO and you can greet your CEO appropriately, right? And then information, another more advanced information is about the culture. So, what is the value of the organization, and then um, what you can do and what you cannot do, something like that. And another information that you might want to share during this orientation process is another basic information such as the working hours, the benefits, or even the incentives, how many salaries that you will get, and then what kind of incentives available, and then how to get those incentives. Yeah, something like that. And there are several ways to do the employee orientation. The first one, you can appoint a person in charge. For example, you can appoint the supervisor of the new employees to share those basic informations, or sometimes you can just ask the senior coworker in that department, for example, to share those information to the new employees. That's the first way to do the employee orientation. Another way to implement the employee orientation is by sharing a kind of handbook. So it will be easier for the new employees to learn some basic information about organization through handbook or even online platforms, because typically if information is already um, documented in either handbook or online platform, typically it will be more structured. Because if you appoint a supervisor or senior coworker to share some basic informations, perhaps, or there is some case that some information might be, skip. because there is a chance that the supervisor or even the senior coworker forget about some important points. But when you already put it, when you already write it down in the handbook or in the kind of employee website, something like that, it will be more structured because you can evaluate it more thoroughly and more carefully, right? So yeah, that is about the orientation process. So now we are going to start discussing about the employee training. So basically, the um, employee orientation is to make sure that you achieve a so-called person organization fit. I already explained it before, right? So when you work in organization, you need to have a person organization fit. So your values should be fit with the organization values. That's the main purpose of employee orientation. But in employee training, the main purpose is to achieve so-called person job fit. So um, you are not only required to achieve person organization fit, but you also need to achieve so-called person job fit, right? So your skills, your knowledge, your abilities, and your characteristics should be aligned with a required knowledge, skills, abilities, and characteristics to perform a particular jobs. So that is the main purpose of the employee training, which is to make sure or to teach the new or even the current employees to have basic knowledge, skills, abilities, characteristics to perform their jobs. In the next parts, I'm going to discuss how to design a training for the employees, either for new or for the current employees. So as you can see here in this figure, typically the in designing training, the first one you need to do, the first stage you need to do is by conducting needs assessment. So you need to figure out whether what kind of training that your employee needs to have. And then the next stage is to make sure that your employee is ready to do the training. After you successfully make sure that your employee ready to do the training, you need to plan the training program. It involves um, deciding the objectives of the training programs, and then selecting the trainers, and then choosing the appropriate methods to deliver that training. The next stage is to implement the training program. In implementing this training program, you need to make sure that the training program fulfill the principles of learning and that the training program ensures the transfer of training. And the last one is the evaluation toward the training program, whether the training is successful or not. If it is successful, then you can um, continue that training program, but if there is any values in the training programs, you need to improve what you need to improve. So let's discuss more detail about each stage. The first one is the needs assessment. So the idea of this stage is to evaluate the organization, um, individual employees, and employees' tasks to determine what kinds of training that are necessary. So based on this idea, there are at least three aspects that need to be assessed. The first one is the organization aspect. So in this organization analysis, you need to um, determine the appropriateness of training by evaluating the characteristics of the organization. So at least there are two main characteristics of the organization that you need to assess. The first one is related to the organization strategy or structure. So sometimes the organizations develop a new strategy, for example, like um, um, in the next 2 years, a an automobile dealer is planning to open a new dealer in a new province of Indonesia, for example. When you have that strategy, then you might try to identify what kind of skills or what kind of knowledge that your employee need to be succeed in opening that new dealer in the new area or new province, for example. In that case, for example, you might find that you need to, for example, um, invite the local so-called experts that really understand the characteristics of customer in that new province, and then that expert might give some training to the employees that you will assign to work in that new province, in that new office, to give knowledge about what is different about that province with other province in Indonesia, and then what is the characteristics of the customers, and then what are the barriers that might happen, and so on and so forth. So that is the example how organization strategy um, determines the needs of training. Another aspect is kind of, for example, the change in organization structure. For example, when you decide to do the efficiency in your organization, you might um, reduce the number of employees and enrich the duties for each jobs. In that case, you need to train the employee to perform, the new jobs, um, the new design of the jobs. the jobs that just enlarge, the job that just uh, um, enrich, right? So that is the example how the structure also might influence the training needs assessment. Another issue is related to the budget, the time, and the expertise for training. For example, if you have a limited budget, you might want to, although you might want to do a lot of uh, training programs, but if your company's budget is limited, then you need to set up, the priority of the training program that you want to perform. Another factor is time. Of course, it is also a significant factor that might influence your training program. So although you have a lot of training program, but if you have a very limited time, then it is the same case as the budget. You need to prioritize a more critical training. And then the expertise. So if you expert in the training program that you design, you can do it by yourself. But if you don't feel expert enough in that area, you might invite external trainer to provide that kind of training. Um, the second aspect that you need to assess is the person. So when you do the person analysis, you will analyze the individual's needs and readiness for training. So one important questions that you need to consider in doing the person analysis is to is to analyze whether the uh, performance deficiencies is the result of from the lack of a knowledge, skill, and or ability. Because sometimes when your employee performance decrease, it is not only about the lack of knowledge, ability, and skill, but there might be another reason. For example, the lack of motivation. Why the lack of motivation? Perhaps because they have a a bad, compensation management. Their salary is not big enough to cover the job descriptions that they have, for example, or the incentive is not appealing enough for them to motivate them to do more, for example. If that is the case, then the training is not a good option. But if the case is because your employee is lack of knowledge, skill, or ability, then training program is necessary. Another issue that you need to address in this person analysis is to evaluate who needs the training, what jobs that needs the training, or who, I mean, which employee that needs the training. You need to resolve this question, and then whether the employees are ready for training. This is also another issue, and we will discuss it more detailed later. So the third analysis you need to do is the task analysis. It involves identifying the tasks, knowledge, skills, and behaviors that the training should emphasize. So typically, the task analysis is conducted simultaneously with the person analysis. The idea is that you need to evaluate. Uh, Let me put it in this way. So, for we have discussed about a kind of job enlargement or job enrichment. It is the process or the activity to add up more duties or more responsibilities to a particular job, right? So when it is happen, when it is the case, then the current knowledge, skills, and abilities of the employee that perform that jobs will not be enough to perform that job, right? In that case, you will need to have a training to make sure that you have sufficient knowledge and skills to perform the new jobs, to perform the jobs that just enrich or enlarge, right? So that is the idea of the task analysis. So after the needs assessment, the next step you need to do is to make sure the readiness for training. So it is a combination of employee characteristics and positive work environments that um, permit training or make the training more easier to be effective. So based on this definition, you can see that at least there are two aspects that are important to make sure the readiness of training. The first one is the employee characteristics, and the second one is the work environment, right? So in terms of the employee characteristics, to make sure that your employee have sufficient readiness for training, they need to have sufficient cognitive ability, right? They need to have sufficient, let's say, intelligence to understand or to get through the training process. Another important aspect um, for the employee to be to have sufficient readiness for training is that they have sufficient motivation to learn. And sufficient motivation to learn is influenced by several factors. The first one is the confidence in ability to learn. So in this part, it is also related with the cognitive ability. When you have sufficient cognitive ability, then you will have sufficient confidence to learn, right? Another aspect is the awareness of need to learn. It is also important for you to aware why I need to do this training. Is it because I lack of particular knowledge or skills? Something like that. You need to be aware that you have some disadvantage in terms of either knowledge, skills, or ability to perform the jobs. That's why you need to learn. That's why you need to join the training program. Another criteria, another factor that influence the motivation to learn is the perceived benefits. So it is important for the employee to understand what are the benefits in joining a particular training program. For example, um, by considering the rise of AI, for example, it is important for you to it is important for employee to to learn about AI, for example. Otherwise, you know, your jobs might be replaced by AI. So that is one of the benefits of joining, kind of training program. Another factor that influence your motivation to learn, or that influence the employee's motivation to learn, is the alignment with the career goals. For example, as a salesperson, typically your career goals is at least to be promoted as a marketing manager, for example. So any training that help you to be promoted as a marketing manager will motivate you to join, the training program. And another, the last factor that influence the motivation to learn is the possession of basic skills. So, for example, um, when you are encouraged to join a training for international marketing manager, for example, at least you need to understand about English, for example. If you don't have sufficient ability to speak or understand English, then you will be demotivated to join that kind of training program, right? Okay, so that is the some employee characteristics that determine the readiness for training. Another factor that determine the readiness for training is the work environment. So there are several factors like situational constraints, social support, and employer role. For example, when there is a limited budget, time, or tools, it will be a constraint that make your employee ready to join the training. And then for the social support, it is also important. So to join a training program, encouragement from managers and your coworkers is also important to improve your readiness for training. And sometimes, for example, as a nurse, for example, in a hospital, for example, when you leave your jobs for to join a training program, it will be difficult because the shift schedule for a nurse is quite tight, and it will be difficult for you to leave your jobs in especially if it is more than 2 days, for example. Then in that case, your coworker support, like um, offering a helping hand to cover your work schedule, will be very, very important to support you and improve your readiness to join the training program. And then another example is like employer role, like reward for the learning. For example, when you join the training program, you will receive kind of incentive. That will be another support that might improve your readiness for training. Okay, so the next stage after you do the needs assessment and then make sure the readiness for training is um, by doing a planning for the training program. So in this part, you need to decide the objectives of the training, why it is important for you to to list the objectives, because it makes you more focused in the training, and then it can guide the trainers. So for example, when I give a training for you in the so-called leadership camp, it is easier for me when I have the kind of um, term of reference from the organizer, because from the terms of reference that I receive, I can understand what is the objective of the training, and it will be easier for me to design, the training course. And another benefits of objectives is helping the employees to learn, because they understand what is the objectives, and it makes the employee easier in catching up what is the main topics that are discussed in the training program. And the last benefits is that by listing the objective, or by writing down the objectives, it will be easier for the management to measure the success of particular training program. So there are several indicators of effective objectives, like the a clear definition about the expected performance, quality levels and conditions, and then a measurable standards, and the needed resources, like whether you need external or internal trainers, and whether you need to book a hotel, or whether you only need to do it in your kind of inside your companies, or using the company's room, something like that. Whether you need to do it using LCD projector, for example, and so on and so forth, something like that. And a planning in the training program also involves whether the training is conducted in-house or contracted out. So it is related um, to the issue that I have mentioned earlier, whether your companies have expertise in the area that you are going to train. If the answer is yes, then you can do it in-house. You can do it by yourself. But on the other hand, if you don't feel that you are good enough in that area or in that topic of training, you might invite, kind of external trainer, right? For example, um, in our school, um, the Department of Management once invited a trainer from external party that train us how to be a good public speaker. Perhaps at that time the management felt that we don't, sufficient, we don't expert enough in, doing a um, uh, public speaking, right? That's why we invite external speaker to train the professors how to become a good public speaker. So something like that. So after we do the planning, the next one is to decide what uh, training methods that we prefer. There are several options. The most classical one is the classroom instruction. So it's just training which is conducted to through lecturing in the classroom, like what we usually have in the class. Another way is using the audiovisual training. Um, in this case, uh, it can be delivered through the online platform, or sometimes you can also use the computer-based learning, um, such such as you can see in the third points, right? Yeah, and then another methods of training is the on-the-job training. So the idea of this training is, um, sorry. So basically, the idea of the on-the-job training is to train the employee with um, job experience and skill through practicing in the workplace. And typically, it can be delivered through two ways. The first one is through apprenticeship, and the second one is through internship. For the difference between apprenticeship and internship is the degree of the expertise. If the degree of the expertise is very specific, then you might use the apprenticeship. Some jobs that might be more appropriate to use the apprenticeship is kind of carpenter, and then machine operator, something like that. So the time to finish the apprenticeship is also longer because it is more specific. And for the internship, typically it is sponsored by an educational institution as a component of an academic program. So um, as you can find in the next few semesters, you might have a chance to get to join a um, Merdeka Belajar internship, right? So in that case, typically it is more general, and it doesn't take uh, a long time, right, to finish the internship. Typically, you can just finish it within at least one semester or 6 months, around that time, right? So that is the on-the-job training. Another way to do the training is through the simulation. So basically, it represents a real life situation. Typically, some jobs that are more practical need this kind of training. For example, when you work as a barista and then your company decided to buy, let's say, a new espresso machine, for example, then you need to join a training program that's specifically designed to to use that new espresso machine through the simulation. So you will learn from the expert how to use that espresso machine, and you will practice how to do it as introduced by the trainer, something like that. And Another jobs that also usually use this kind of training is a job like pilot, and it is also related with the uh, 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 phenomenon about the rise of virtual reality, right? So some jobs that have a higher risk of safety, for example, nowadays they already um, get used to simulation using virtual reality. So, for example, when you work as a pilot and then you want to get a new skills in operating a new aircraft, for example, at the first time you will join the simulation training using VR because it will be too dangerous for you if you directly, you know, uh, jump to the cockpit of the new aircraft that you never seen before, and then you just bring some passengers through a flight. It will be too risky for you and especially for your passengers, right? That's why nowadays, by the rise of virtual reality, some jobs and some companies also use this kind of simulation to train some new skills and some new knowledge about a jobs. Another methods of training is business game and case studies. So it is also relevant for some jobs. Typically, for a managerial level jobs, or even entry level jobs, sometimes also need this kind of training. For example, some jobs like salesperson, there are some training that use business games. For example, you will be assigned a project, for example, with some budget, and then there will be some groups of salesperson that assigned to use certain amount of budget to develop kind of promotion programs. So a groups that uh, has a higher outcomes from the same budget will receive a higher score of the training, something like that. Another methods of training is through the experiential programs. So it is conducted by simulating behavior with the real life situations. Um, Sometimes it can be conducted through the outbound, or we call it also as adventurous learning. So by having some games, some fun games, um, the trainer might, uh, simulating particular behavior with the real life situations. For example, what the games that I gave you during the leadership camp, it is one of the example of the experiential programs. When I want you to learn about time management, I ask you to list, what you usually do in a day and what you expect you should do in the other column to to give you illustration about the time management, something like that. Another way of training is using a team training. So it is a training that um, um, shape your ability to work as a team, and it can be delivered in several ways, like cross training. So cross training, the idea of cross training is that you will be assigned to work as a team with employees from other departments. So the idea is that you need to learn how other department works. So it can typically, the purpose of this kind of training is to make you understand that as an organization you need to work across, you need to coordinate across departments, right? Sometimes the problem of the organization is that there is an ego, a sectoral ego, um, which arise because some department feel that they are the most important department in the organization, right? Something like that. So the purpose of the cross training is to develop kind of understanding that as a member of the company, as a member of the organizations, you need to work across divisions. You need to understand how important other division is, how important other department is. So that is the main purpose of the cross training. So another type of team training is the coordination training. So typically it helps you um, have a better coordination within your department, something like that. And then the team leader training. So in this type of team training, it trains you to become a leader of a team. So a team most of the time need a leader, and the purpose of this training is to, you know, train employee to be ready as a team leader. The last methods of training is action learning. So the idea of this training is to give your team. So typically the organization will form a team, and then that team will be assigned an actual problem of the organization, and you will be required to solve that problem and be committed to implement your idea to resolve that problem. And if you succeed in doing that, your team will your team might receive some rewards by helping the organization in resolving a particular problem. So after selecting appropriate methods of training, the next part is implementing the training program. So in implementing the training program, you need to understand the principles of learning. What is that? So you need to make sure that the training you give motivates your employee to learn. So there are several um, training activity that you need to take care of, and you also need to understand some ways to provide that training activity. For example, the first one, you need to communicate the learning objectives. It can be done by demonstrating the performance to be expected and then give examples of questions to be answered. And then you also need to use distinctive and attention-getting message. So when you invite your employees to join a training, you should make sure that your invitation is appealing enough for your employee to join. You need to stress the key points that the training program offers, and then sometimes you also need pictures or video to illustrate the importance of the training and what you will gain from the training. And then you also need to limit the content of training, and then guide trainees as they learn, and then elaborate on the subject, provide memory cues, transfer course content to the workplace, and the last one is providing feedback about the performance. So I wish you can take a look more detail into this figure to understand more about this one. Okay. Other than understand the principle of learning, you also need to transfer the learning. So um, you need to make sure that the knowledge, skills, and behaviors learned in the training should be implemented in your job. So that is the idea of the transfer of learning. And there are several conditions to make sure the success of training implementation. At least there are three parts. There are aspects. The first one is social support, the second one is technical support, and the last one is the self-management. So in order to make sure, in order to ensure the success of training implementation, um, you need to make sure that the managers and the coworkers provide sufficient support. Sometimes, or most of the time, I can say, when after you join the training, you will bring some new ideas, some new ways in doing particular jobs. What makes training fail is that most of the time the managers and the coworkers, I can say, reluctant toward those new ideas or toward those new ways in performing a particular jobs. When this is the case, then uh, no matter how many you send your employee to join a training, that will be useless because your manager and your coworkers never accept a new ways and new knowledge as a new approach toward a particular jobs. So make sure that your managers and your coworkers um, also have a sufficient readiness to change, right? To make sure that the implementation of training program successful. Another form of social support is the communities of practice. So sometimes it is difficult if, let's say, in one department there are, let's say, 20 employees, but you only send one employee to join a particular training program. It will be much more easier to implement a training program if you send, for example, 5 out of 20 employees to join a training program, because those 5 employees that already joined the training program, they can form so-called a communities of practice. They can form a group to practice what they have learned, and then because those new knowledge is implemented by, um, although it is not a majority, but it is at least, well, 25% of the members of the department, right? So it has sufficient influence to change how your organization works, right? That is the idea of communities of practice. And when those 5 employees successfully recruit other members of organization to join the group, to join the community, it will be getting and large. And at the end, eventually, all of the members of the department will have shared knowledge, shared approach in doing, in performing a particular job. Okay. And another one is mentoring. So when you already send some employees to join a training program, you might ask them to become a mentor for other employees, to teach other employees how to perform particular jobs. So another factor that can influence the success of implementation of training program is through technical support. It can be conducted through performance support systems. So, for example, um, using this system, you can identify how the performance before employee join the training and after the employee join the training program, something like that. And then self-management is also important. So individually, the employee who joined the training should uh, have a clear goals, and then they need to anticipate for obstacles like what I have mentioned here, like the lack of support for managers and then peers. They need to anticipate those kind of obstacle, and then they also need to individually monitor the progress. And another important part is they need to be persevere. They need to, how to say it, they need to have um, sufficient motivation to do one thing even if the thing that they do is unsuccessful. They need to do it again and again. That is a perseverance. Okay. And then the last one is evaluation of the training program. So one of the most important part about evaluating is the planning itself, right? Because in the planning, as I mentioned earlier, you have to decide a clear objectives. By deciding a clear objectives, it will be easier for you to measure the success of the training program. There are several ways in doing the evaluation methods. The first option is using the trainee satisfaction. So typically, when you join a training program, at the end of the training days, you will be given a survey to measure whether you satisfy about the training program. Typically, it measures whether the place, the environment is comfortable enough, whether the trainer is expert enough,